discovered this thing, sparring with a karate devotee who had, I think he was then third degree. Very good, very strong defense. And he mentioned parenthetically that his wife, his Chinese Hawaiian wife, could put his lights out with not a whole lot of trouble. And I said, well, how would she do that? He says, Kung Fu. Uh-huh.
Well, Ed was always filling my head with these incredible stories of martial arts and Kung Fu, which I had never heard of, and in fact, nobody had ever heard of in the Western world. I mean, it was not a word or two words known in the English language.
You will follow me.
And one day he sits down and he writes this thing about the Japanese legendary samurai warrior Musashi. And in that story was a monk of the Shaolin temple. And the story of that monk just resonated with me. I loved that character. I suddenly got this idea. It like burst in my brain, and I turned to him and I said, Ed, it's a Western. And he said, what? I said, it's a Western. The Shaolin monk, bring him to the West, it's a Western. And his mouth dropped open, and he realized that was it.
The concept of the series was of a person, a man who was not involved, a man who avoided action at almost any cost, and a very quiet, seemingly passive man, and no one understood how we could make a television series out of that.
I was sitting in my office one day, and as studio executives do, I had a rather large office. It was just after lunch, and I was doing something studiously at my desk, and I heard my secretary say, you can't just walk in there. And I looked up, and there's this very large man coming at me, lumbering across my office, and he throws a script down on my desk, and he says, the movie guys don't want to do this. I thought maybe you'd like to have it. And it said Kung Fu. And I said, what's a Kung Fu? I think I had some for lunch. I got it on my tie.
It's very, very difficult to sell an original idea. Kung Fu took a long time because nobody understood it. Nobody knew what Kung Fu was. As I said before, we were two kids from Brooklyn who invented this thing, in a sense.
I thought, you know, there is no way this could be a television series. You know, half Chinese guy you know, stuff back in the temple and all that. And a Western where the guy doesn't ride a horse, and doesn't use a gun. But it's a great show.
Please go home.
There was a mixture of things involved about this time. People were interested in Zen.
No, you may stay.
There was a sense of spirituality about things having to do with the Orient, with Asia, and martial arts fit into that.
It was obvious from the first reading of the show that this was something pretty special and that it had never been done before. All the people who were involved in it, they really knew that this was something risky. It had never been done in the television landscape before.
Jerry and Tom Kuhn, who was then president of Warner Brothers Television, asked me if I would join them in going back to New York to meet Martin Starger, who was the president of ABC, to pitch the series to him. He said, well, I don't understand how this works. And I thought, oh, that's the end of that. But he then continued and said, but you guys seem to, so let's go ahead. And we did.
It was not a show for NBC. It was not a show for CBS. But at ABC, there was a guy named Barry Diller. And my boss, Jerry Leiter, and I both knew him a little bit and thought, you know, here's a young hotshot who's going to look at this material and say, this is something different. And we guessed right. And Barry got real interested in it. And it took a while because for any network to go with a show that didn't star an American white guy at that time was pretty bizarre. But we finally got an order from them for one 90-minute movie. At that time, Barry was like, I think he started the TV movie of the week. And they were 90 minutes at that time. And then, you know, they got a lot of mail. The show did very well. We figured they were going to order a series, and instead, in their conservative way, I think they ordered either one or two more 90-minute movies. We just sort of had to keep proving ourselves with this damn thing until they finally ordered 13 episodes, and then it went on for another couple of years.
We thought we had a responsibility to canvass the Asian community, and we interviewed just about every actor in town.
We sought out every Asian actor in Hollywood because, I mean, you didn't have to be super bright to know what was coming. But none of them really measured up. There wasn't one guy who showed up, we said, this guy can carry this series.
Jerry wanted Bruce Lee to do this part. I remember him telling me this, but nobody knew who Bruce Lee was, and you know, they didn't think that an Asian guy could do an Asian guy.
This little guy walks to my house and kicks my door shut with his foot. The door slams. What the hell is this? And here's, you know, little Bruce Lee with his gym bag in one hand, and he pulls out a nunchuck and starts swinging at me. And it's going by my nose. I said, what are you doing? He says, don't move. I said, don't worry. I'm stupid, but I'm not nuts. What are you doing? Put that thing down. And he said, feel my arm. Which I did, which is like a rock. I mean, the guy he was unbelievable, and his presence was just mesmerizing. But we spent about an hour together talking, showing me his book and his bag of tricks and whatever. And frankly, I had trouble understanding him.
So we moved on to the Caucasian list, which the casting office sent down, and it was fairly lengthy, but one name on the list jumped off the page for me: David Carradine.
Jerry Thorpe sent this script to me. And I remember my manager said, you got to read this script. He said, I got to tell you one thing, though. There's a series contract attached to it. And I know you don't want to do a series. I said, no, I sure don't. He said, yeah, but you better read this script. So I read the script, and it was just right up my alley, and it was just such a remarkable thing. I mean, I don't know if you have any idea how unusual, how just far out this material was in 1971. And I looked at it and I thought, I can't believe they're going to do this on television.
I talked the Warner Brothers executive hierarchy into flying David out from New York. I'm not sure about that, but I think we did. In any case, he did come for an interview, albeit somewhat reluctantly, I think. His reading was riveting, everything that I had expected. But his attitude was not positive. It fell somewhere between uncommunicative and belligerent, maybe defiant.
And I remember Jerry asking me, what are you going to do about the martial arts stuff? You know? And I said, well, and I told him my background, you know. I said, I think I can handle it. Even as a dancer, I can just take it as choreography. And anyway, you know, what happened to stuntmen? This was before we had discovered that you better do all this stuff yourself or nobody's going to want to watch you. We started that. You know, me and Bruce gave people the impression that they wanted to really see it happen. But just for emphasis, as I was going out of the place, I jumped up and basically using a Gene Kelly move, I kicked the wall above the door and I left my bare footprint there and walked on out the door. And I think as they were thinking, you know, is he the right guy or not, they probably just kept looking at that. They never did take it off. It was there above the door for the whole series.
There were 3, 4, 5 of us in the room, and it was like, what is this guy on? What was he doing? I mean, he was bouncing off the walls. But we called his agent, and he said, oh, David thought that's what you wanted for the role, because it's such a strange role, and it's so... It was one of the great agent gabs of all time. I mean, to the point where I finally said, look, I've got to look at other actors, but maybe we'll have David back at some point.
Tom Yuen was really wary about using a man with that kind of temperament for a long-term series. And after about a week of interviewing actors, I went up to Tom Yuen's office in frustration and said, Tom, I am convinced that David Carradine is the only man on the planet who can really do justice to this part.
What happens in a man's life is already written. Man must move through life as his destiny wills.
Yes, yet each man is free to live as he chooses. Though they seem opposite, both are true. I do not understand it.
Tom said, well, it's your call. He certainly is talented. Just remember, if you cast him and you have problems, you're going to have to deal with them.
Tie him.
There was a talk in Hollywood announcing that David Carradine was signed to do a kung fu and such. And so we had made a demand. One was to replace David Carradine. And two, hire Chinese American or Chinese technical advisor, as well as historical advisors.
ABC was clearly in a terrible position. You know, they agreed with us, but they didn't want to offend the Asian community, and some kind of a deal was struck. We had an Asian advisor, kung fu guy on the show, David Chow, and as much Asian involvement as we could get, but David was to be the star of the show.
In the Shaolin Temple, we have never accepted anyone of other than full Chinese birth.
Philip Ahn, the actor who played Master Khan, he was a very regal human being and very reserved and very intelligent.
There is a first for everything.
Philip Ahn and Keye Luke are, when you do a movie, a television series, anything, you'd always like to know that there's at least a couple actors who are just rock solid, who are going to give you a performance, not going to give you trouble. They're going to help you tell the story. If you need them to bend that way, blow this way, they'll do it. And that's what those two guys did. And the audience loved them. They couldn't get enough of them.
Grasshopper, did you think you could fool me? It would take more than years for me to forget the footsteps of my favorite pupil.
Our team, I think, was just the most amazing crowd of people, just the best. We just were blessed with some wonderful, wonderful directors.
Jerry was a masterful director. He just had it down.
Probably one of the things that was paramount in achieving the camera style and imagery was a idiosyncrasy I had about staging and forced perspective for television. Because I found that the sets could be minimal. And you could still do interesting things and have multiple interests by staging and forced perspective. So that was my personal style, which I conveyed to every director we had.
I am Kwai Chang Caine.
Jerry Thorpe, I think, is a wonderfully creative man who's a brilliant executive and really knows how to manage people and knows how to inspire them to do their best, and does it in a very kind way and in a very good, challenging way. And working with him is a terrific experience.
The style of that show was absolutely set in cement. So it's not that directors didn't have leeway to be creative. Of course they did. But they had to stay with what that show was in order for it to stay true. We got letters from, viewers were so into that show that if we did something wrong, if we slipped up, we got caught. We got mail.
The first day of the filming, Caine's character was walking in the wilderness, and he was supposed to find an edible root and take it out of the ground and eat it. Unfortunately, the property master had secured the root so that David had difficulty getting it out of the ground at his first try, and he then used his strength and ripped it out of the ground and ate it with gusto. I cut the camera and took David aside and said, "David, I have a feeling that this hero's behavior should not be heroic." And he gave me that bemused smile again and turned his back and walked into the set. The next take was an actor's studio textbook demonstration of character delineation. From my really slender direction, he had taken the next step and made a character choice for the entire series.
One thing that I remember about Jerry Thorpe, which I'll give you a little piece of, why I have such reverence for him. In the original movie, Way of the Dragon, it was called, there was a sequence where I'm supposed to be standing on top of a rock, very tall rock, and the bad guys come riding below me, and I leap off the rock.
I explained to him that because he was coming into camera that we couldn't use a stunt double, and that it had always been my policy to perform the stunt myself before I asked the actor to do it.
And he leapt off the cliff. And there are two photographs that he had in his office, and one is of me leaping off the cliff, right? And I'm leaping off the cliff like this, kind of. And there's a shot of Jerry Thorpe, who is diving off the cliff, and his body is absolutely straight as a log, like an Olympic diver. And the expression on his face is an expression of pure tranquility, utter calm.
I don't think David was particularly impressed that I had dived off the rock. But I do think that he realized that I would always be willing to protect him.
We did not have a writing team. We took scripts from all over the place. And what we told them was, don't bother to write the temple sequences. We'll write them. Because we had mountains of research, and we were trying to do it really right.
The trick was to try to find a way to make a series out of what had been a single pilot and then some attempts to make single episodes, but not one that had any continuity. These were standalone episodes, but nevertheless to show how a series like this could work without an active protagonist, and in fact antithetical to everything that had gone before in the way of a Western.
Now that's unfriendly.
Herman Miller was a man who I think really held up the standard for let's make each one of these episodes make sense, karmically make sense from a logical standpoint, that this happens to characters, but also let's keep the integrity of the philosophy, because only if we do that will the show ultimately have the kind of value and power that it had.
Newcomer, why don't you speak? A man without words is a man without brains.
One's words are no better than silence. One should keep silent.
One of the things I tried to do in the first scripts was to keep his language extremely simple, frequently just one word. A speech would be a single word.
Yes. No. Yes.
No?
It's good.
More.
And when he did have longer things to say, to rely on David Carradine's marvelous rhythms as an actor to make things that seemingly were aphoristic, which they were, make them understandable and colloquial, make it sound like genuine speech and not a set kind of piece that he would be saying. And he was absolutely incredible at doing that.
Facing death yet one more time. Yours, mine. It's the death that fascinates you. Looking into its eyes. You are the bird. The cobra is death.
There was a picture called An Eye for an Eye, which was, I think, maybe the first one that we shot. And there's a thing at the end of it where somebody who's just had this big revenge motif all the way through the show says to me, if I don't have a right to revenge, who does? And Caine, who's walking away, as usual, well, it's the first time, at this point, turns around and says, no one.
If I don't have a right to revenge, who does?
No one.
And it's interesting because that was the theme, really. I mean, it's an anti-revenge television series.